All right, we are recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Interviews You Didn't Ask For, where everyone on the show is someone I know. We're doing a special episode today because I kind of just like stopped doing them for a while. But this was a topic that I kept seeing coming up, and it was just in my heart that we needed to have this conversation. So, one, we're bringing this back and doing something where I'm bringing back two people. I've never done that before, and we have three people on this call. So the Zoom call, I'm gonna just say up in advance because I don't know how this is gonna go. That it may just cut off and we might have to do some editing. So if it's a little choppy, just please forgive us. But I felt like this was important. The topic we're talking about today is the vaccine.
Hmm.
And not just generally about the vaccine, but what prompted me to want to bring this group together was I kept seeing articles talking about Black people being one of the largest groups not really trying to get this vaccine. We'll talk about the COVID vaccine, just in case someone's watching this. But this is 2021. In case you watching this in like 2050, I don't know. Um, but the thing that stuck out to me was that there was a lack of awareness
Hmm.
around why Black people don't want to get this vaccine, and it was irking me, especially when it got to I started seeing some what I'm calling white splaining, where we have people who are trying to explain to Black people what happened during the Tuskegee experiment because they keep hearing that as a reason, which I don't feel like most of us need that explanation because you're missing the point. It's
Right.
it's not about the Tuskegee experiment, it's about the history. And I feel like we needed to have that conversation about what is the history that makes Black folks so hesitant to get this vaccine, and what are some real solutions. I feel like we are a trio of experts. We have, I'm gonna start with myself. I'm from diversity and inclusion. That's my background and education and my work. And I immediately saw that that was what was needed in that conversation, why it was failing. And I'm gonna let the other two guests introduce themselves, and I'll probably throw in some links when I post this to the original conversations we had. So, Ebony, would you like to go first?
Okay. Like, do I say like our title or anything?
Say
Or
whatever you want to say, girl.
so, well, I am a COVID case investigator. Have a master's in public health from Western Michigan. So, yay.
Thank you. Thank you. And Rachel, let's hear about you. Who are you?
Who am I? That's a deeply philosophical question. No, by profession, I'm a assistant professor of women's and gender studies, and my research areas have to do with medical history and medical experimentation, which is histories of medical experimentation and medical ethics. So that's what I look at in relation to gender and race and sexuality and all that good stuff.
I mean, I'm excited about the conversation. We've got a medical historian, we got someone who's actively working at COVID, and then me over here talking about diversity and inclusion. So I just want to jump right in. And I know I sent over some numbers, and I honestly want to pull it up just to read it. Girl, my lash gonna come off. If it does, just ignore it, y'all. Um, but it was about all these. I wanted to read these because I realized it's not just Black people. We're going to be talking a lot about race, and we're going to be talking a lot about Black people, but it's not just Black people having issues, and it's a large scale concern for the country and probably the world that so many Americans are leery about this vaccine. So, pulling from different articles, 40% of frontline workers in LA refused to get the vaccine. In Ohio, approximately 60% of nursing home staff declined it. Roughly 55% of the surveyed New York Fire Department firefighters said they wouldn't get it. And then 40% of the hospital staff in Chicago has also declined. So you've got your essential workers, you've got your frontline workers, you've got your people working in healthcare who are also kind of leery. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we don't know the makeup of those groups, but we do know that it all kind of rooted in the same place. So I actually wanted to start the conversation because I was digging around in my favorite book. I'm always talking about medical apartheid. I have not finished reading it, but I wanted to start with slavery. I know we going way back, but I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to start with slavery, and I'm just going to open it up to see, to just talk about what were some of the things that were happening in the medical field during that time, just period.
Well, what you had in the U.S. Southern slave economy was a need for management. of bodies, right? So we're talking about, you know, people, owned people. And so this is why we start to see sort of rises and transitions. For example, there's brilliant books about the transition from midwifery to medicine to medical birthing practices. So midwifery would have been probably Black grandmothers and folks, older women on the plantations that were caring for others, and they had a very esteemed and important role in the management. They would have used herbalism. You know, they were known as root doctors and that kind of thing. And then the introduction of white male sort of medicalized birthing practices for one. So that's something that I've personally looked at in the histories. But what you had is the need to manage the reproduction, because after the slave trade was actually ended, we still had decades and decades of slavery in this country. So that the Atlantic slave trade in London in the US came to an end around the same time. But then, so how do you reproduce the economy of slavery? Well, you have to rely then on Black bodies to do it. And so to literally breed, you know, future slaves, to be crude about it. And so there was a lot of medical management that was required there. And then the perilous conditions of slavery itself, and thinking about the labor and the heat and the, you know, just all of this kind of stuff. And we could go on, but, and, you know, the bodily trauma, you know, from punishment and things like that, you know, the psychic trauma, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of the management, you know, within the slave community itself would have been around managing those issues in terms of Black health. But as you know, and then within the white Southern slave economy, there was the need to manage Black women's reproduction. Mm-hmm. And there's some great books about that management as well. But then there was also, you know, it was, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic now, but they would have been contending with, you know, the average lifespan was much younger then. It was about 39 years old in like the 19th century, at least.
For slaves or just in general?
In general, the general.
Wow.
And so people were facing, you know, this was like the Wild Wild West. You know, people were facing, you know, cholera and all kinds of diseases, dysentery, you know, the flu, and we didn't have necessarily the understanding of germ theory at the time that we do now. And so pain would have been thought about a lot differently. Anesthesia was just starting to become developed. So a lot of the brutality as far as sickness and stuff like that was everyday reality. A lot of children died and stuff like that. So that's kind of in a big picture sense what we're looking at in terms of slavery and medicine. At least in the 19th century. Of course, you know, slavery's been around since 1619, if you look at the 1619 Project. But by the 19th century, that's what we were dealing with.
I think it's interesting that, you know, I don't know why it's really hitting home for me how we still are dealing with the impact of slavery. Like, I guess I knew, but as I was reading through the book, tying back to some mythology about Black people that still exists. So you think about the current issue of doctors not listening to Black people, doctors believing that Black people don't feel pain. And then you see the connection to that to during slavery, the belief that Black people would be lying about discomfort, pain, being sick, that they're pretending to be sick because they're lazy. So to me, that's like, you know, two stereotypes, that Black people are lazy and that Black people are lying and pretending to be sick and don't actually feel that type of pain. Or even the connection with
I just have to pause on that one, like
go ahead.
the contradictions of the, you know, the idea that Black people are lazy and yet, you know, built the whole U.S. economy.
Yep, and continue to carry it on their backs.
That is the trick that racism and white supremacy plays. But yeah, pain is a big part of that. And what we had is a lot of racial, what they called racial science literature at the time in medicine. But what it really is scientific racism. And so you would literally see some of those justifications and beliefs, not just about Black pain, which was a big part of it, but that Black people were somehow more suited to the conditions of slavery because they were more able to withstand, you know, all of the perils of the conditions required of you know, being bonds people. And then we also see beliefs about, fertility, the belief that Black women particularly were somehow more fertile, which of course, all of these feed very easily into the justifications for slavery. But this is written and documented in what they call racial science literature, which was, widely read. And at the time, they were writing about whether they believed that, human beings came from the same source, or whether there were different racial taxonomies, right, that evolved at a different speed, and just, stuff like that. So we saw a lot of that, and that the bedrock of the beliefs, the distrust, the beliefs about pain and Black women, the literature about medicine and the racial empathy gap certainly still resonates.
So that makes me think of a current case. I don't know if you both saw the Black female doctor who had COVID.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
was.
I want to hear from Ebony on this one. Yeah.
Dr. Susan Moore, because I actually watched her whole video, and it was so heartbreaking. And she posted that video. I think she died 2 days later.
I haven't seen the whole video. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, tell us.
Okay. So she was basically saying she had, because she's a doctor herself, and she was having some pain, I think it was in her neck. And she was telling them that she was in pain, and they were like, oh, okay. And instead of, they waited like 2 or 3 hours to even get her some pain medication. And then they didn't want to give her a narcotic because they were saying, about their quote unquote policy. I guess, I don't know if they were trying to indicate that she was having drug seeking behavior.
So was this the hospital she worked at?
I don't think so. I think she was in private practice.
Across the board, though, if I could just cut in real quick, we see it under prescribing of pain for the reasons that Ebony just mentioned. So that bears out with the statistical research as well.
Even though we know right now the epidemic we have around, was it heroin, right?
Yeah.
That's not, the opiate epidemic
is
is hitting white folks harder than I would say the communities of color. Yet there's still the idea that we are seeking drugs when we are.
Right, it's red for whatever reason. This is just, I'm curious to hear more what Ebony's heard about this, but this is just, it's red for whatever reason in Black and Latinx women as drug seeking. And so we do tend to see an underprescribing of pain management meds. So the belief in the Black body's pain is something that we still, are struggling with. And this story is so tragic because it just crystallizes that so much.
Yeah, she and she was saying, I'm not a drug seeker. She don't even take medication like that, but she was in so much pain. She also had to advocate for them. They either did like an MRI or a CAT scan to show that she had I don't know if it was like swollen lymph nodes. It shows something where they like, yeah, she is in a lot of pain, but she had to physically prove that.
Wow.
And in order to get pain medication. And then the nurse took like 2 or 3 hours to even get it for her, talking about, oh, well, I have other patients. You're not my only patient. The nurse had only checked in on her maybe once during her shift. And so, and she was saying she had wanted to transfer out of that hospital because the doctor was very condescending to her, even though she was a doctor herself, talking about, the thing that stood out to me was he said he wanted to release her at 10 o'clock at night. I don't know hospitals that discharge that late. And so she was saying she wanted to get out of there before, they would kill her for not listening to her. And then like 2 days later, she ended up dying. And then they had the nerve to blame her, saying, well, she was intimidating.
Yep.
And so that's why she didn't get the care that she needed. And it's like, no, she knew exactly what she needed, and you all didn't deliver. There's no reason she should have died.
So when self-advocacy is read from Black women as, what did they read it as what? That she was intimidating?
While laying in bed dying. While laying in bed dying, yes.
Yes. Intimidating for her self-advocacy about her needs and her pain. Wow. Wow.
And that really hits home for me because my mom used to always tell me when she had to go to the hospital or anything, and just, folks don't know my mom has MS. My mom's also a nurse. She always say, "Don't let them know that I'm a nurse." She never wanted people to know, and I didn't understand. But it's you get caught between feeling like either they're going to feel intimidated, because what they said was, I remember that statement. They said they were intimidated by the fact that she knew what should be done and was asking for it.
Mhm.
So how was that intimidating? Because someone is asking specifically for a treatment.
Right.
Right. So I mean that I'm glad she released that video just to show it doesn't matter how educated you are. I mean she's a whole doctor. She had her
They
own
also
practice.
said they were intimidated by the video, by the fact that she was posting videos.
As they should be. Okay, so they were. Well, this is a very interesting, because we're dealing with that the stuff we've been talking about with the racial empathy gap and the histories of it, and how it crystallized in this tragic story. But then we're also talking about, we have to talk about, and I'm curious what Ebony thinks about the idea of healthcare burnout right now, and that
Mm.
healthcare professionals are so burnt out that you have that layering of, they're stretched thin, and going home, just burnt out, and dealing with the management of this pandemic in everywhere across the country, but particularly in the hotspots. um, and so that is interesting too. I would like to hear what Ebony's experience of that is, as far as being, a COVID tracker and dealing with that.
So I am encountering, of course, a lot of nurses, a lot of nurse assistants that are basically coming, that's testing positive.
Mm.
So if you test positive and you don't have symptoms, you still have to work.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you still have to work if you're in healthcare. I've had some people who had symptoms and they still were forced to work, even though they shouldn't have been working
Wow.
because because of the short staff, especially in our nursing homes and long-term care facilities, where
Mm.
we're seeing the highest outbreaks.
But that's interesting because that's also one of the places where folks are not wanting to get the vaccine. And that, like, I understand Black folks. And I mean, again, when you think about who's working in nursing homes, that tends to be folks of color. But that
Yeah.
that really surprised me that in those spaces, in those situations, that people are not willing to get the vaccine. Is there Why do you think that is, I guess?
Wow, you read my mind too. Because what you said, Jazz, earlier was my back of the napkin math puts us as roughly 50% of people are leery, based on the stat you
And we
quoted.
need like 80-90% of folks to get the vaccine in order for there to be, I don't know, for us to be, what's the
Herd,
word?
it's for herd immunity. We
Yes,
need, I think
yes.
it's like either 88 or 95%. It's one of
Hmm.
those for the population to get vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. But I mean, I think a lot of people are nervous because one, the vaccine came so quickly.
Hmm.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow, we only heard of COVID maybe January, December. Next thing you know, we have a vaccine. And so a lot of people are leery about that. Like, because, the testing, we don't know, how this affect people down the line. So I think some people may be willing to get it, but they just want to wait just to see a little
Mm-hmm.
longer.
And that's, I think, I want to bring, especially we talk about Black people. One of the things I was hearing initially when folks were talking about how African Americans didn't want to get the vaccine is they were labeling it and labeling Black folks as anti-vaxxers, which was the
Yeah.
first time I was like, y'all don't know what the hell y'all talking about. Because what I continue to hear is the same thing, like, not right now, it's too soon. And these are, we get our vaccines, we get shots. We're not, there's definitely anti-vaxxers in our, community the same way it is every other community, but that's not what it is. And so trying to approach it from that angle, I don't think is effective. Because I think, as Ebony pointed out, the question is the process of creating this vaccine
Right.
in a rushed manner. And I don't know how vaccines are created. If either of y'all do,
Well,
please tell
yeah.
us.
Yeah, so they have to go through, they go through a scientific research process, right? And so they have to develop it, and then they have to, administer it to, a small group of people and see, how they respond. And then they do a second group to follow up. And if it meets, the certain criteria and people are handling it well, then, it gets passed. But it's very strict scientific studies. I think that is interesting, because what this says to me is that we need to, these are what all of these points is that we need to sort of tailor the public health education projects around what people's apprehensions are around it. So we need to talk about, how the vaccine was made and how it was able to be produced quickly. I think we need to disentangle the vaccine from the current administration.
Now, how do you do that?
Well, you have to say that scientists created it and that there's a process, and that, while we might have political pressure to do it in a speedy way, expeditiously, that doesn't mean that it didn't go through the clinical trials that are standard procedure in scientific research.
Yeah, I mean,
but we have to trust science too, which
right.
That's been undermined so much, as well, in the current environment.
Yeah, so from what I understood, like, coronavirus has been around for a long time, because coronaviruses are responsible for the common cold. And so from what I heard, the research was there, but now they were able to inject funding into it.
Right.
And so that's why they were able to create, with such speed. But also, Pfizer did not take any money from the federal government for the creation of their vaccine.
That's a really good point.
Yeah,
so
Moderna
it's
did, but
funded by
not
people
Pfizer.
like philanthropists like Bill Gates, provided some research funding, and Dolly Parton, I heard.
Yeah, I heard about Dolly Parton.
So that's where some of the money came from anyway.
But I think we're still battling
private industry effort.
We're still battling something that we saw at the very beginning of the pandemic, which is misinformation and conspiracy theories. And they're very prevalent, not just with one particular community. They're prevalent in the United States. I mean, I think this is, when you look at politics, every layer of anything we have, there's conspiracy theories, there's misinformation. But I do remember, because this is something so new, that you can't turn to anyone who's like, hey, when you experienced this in 19 or the Spanish flu, I think was the last thing, because it's so new, and because of the mistrust of the government prior to this current administration, but even more so now, there's also these conspiracy theories. So no matter what you say, there's someone out there. Because when you brought up Bill Gates, people kept saying, why is Bill Gates so concerned? And then we kind of got caught up in that conspiracy theory about the chip, putting chips in people, relating it to the devil, and all of this other stuff.
We should say unequivocally that all of that stuff has been debunked, is not true, is not factual. Bill Gates has a long history, actually, of he does a lot of work in public health on a global level and provides a lot of funding. So they've been able to eradicate stuff like guinea worm and just various things like that around the world. River blindness they're working on. So a lot of stuff that in the U.S. In rich nations, unfortunately, don't struggle with as much. So that's why he was able to so quickly sort of jump in, and why he's associated with this. But I guess a lot of people may not know that about his philanthropic.
I knew he did a lot of stuff around education. I didn't know about those pieces, but I know I'm skipping ahead, but specifically around these conspiracy theories, what do we do to fix that? I feel like that's one of the hardest pieces, because no matter what you tell people, they don't believe it, right? We've got fake news, and it starts from the very top. The concept of fake news entered the lexicon like when the president entered, you know what I mean? So our understanding of legitimate information and where to get it from, is like this. We're having this conversation, and someone can say, well, is this legitimate information,
Right. And then students come to college and they talk about QAnon and stuff, and so you have to do it. Well, we have to educate at this level anyway. At my level, we have to educate for critical literacy, critical media literacy. And, we know that, we hope anyway, that with education with, that, susceptibility to these kind of conspiracy theories decreases. So I think that our best hope is just, we have to counterbalance, but people are getting their information from such like isolated places. So it's kind of scary. But, facts, you just have to, like, the thing that stood out to me about, let's say, Anthony Fauci, in his role was that he literally every day, and I want to hear from Ebony too, because this is like the role of public health education is you have to be the mouthpiece that goes out and repeats it over and over and over again. And you have to say it 50,000 different ways. And then you just have to be that steady drumbeat. So I think that that's a part of it. But outside of education and just, I don't know, it's hard because you literally can't have a conversation on the basis of no facts. So the only thing I got, y'all, is education and example. I think the efforts to see prominent Black folks and prominent folks, period, who are taking the vaccine publicly, I think that actually does matter. And then we should also say, and I want to hear from Ebony on this too, that, I think our best hope of getting out of this pandemic is actually, we've got to get vaccinated at the levels that she talked about before, which is high 80 to 90%.
I want to come back to, because I have a question for you, Ebony, too. So I want to come back later to about the representation of Black people getting it. Real quick, I want to throw in there that I realize that folks don't know how to even determine if a source is a good source. Like, people used to think The Onion was regular news. And so you'll see people who are responding to just the headline. They didn't open the article, or you look at where the website's from and it's fake. It'll be fakenews.com. But the question I have for you, Ebony, I know we asked you like 87 questions, is are you hearing...
We want to hear from Ebony on.
Yes. You got the tea. You got the tea. We got a historian. It's just me over here hosting, and you got all of the tea. Are you hearing, when you're talking to people, these same conspiracy theories? And yes, no, or what are you hearing about what people believe is happening?
Good question.
Well, most of the people I'm not going to say most of the people I do interact with on a regular basis are actually grateful that we're calling, but also I have a lot of people that's like, I don't want the government in my business. Y'all want to know too much. Why you want to know X, Y, and Z? I'm not giving you this information. And so part of my role as an investigator is to, one, find out, where they've been, find out symptoms they may have had, how they could have contracted COVID-19, and also education. But I ran into some racism on some of my calls.
Towards you?
No, actually.
Toward Asian Americans?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. I have ran into that on my calls and trying to be like, you can't say that. So sometimes it put me in a very tough spot because I want to be like, that's extra wrong. You need to stop listening to the president. But I have to also go to get as much information as I can out of people.
And you don't want to end that call.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it is hard. But as far as misinformation, I've had some people that had COVID and they felt they didn't need to isolate because it wasn't that bad. And so those are the people that's very hard because they just don't understand that you're contagious even though your symptoms are mild or you have no symptoms at all. You can't just be running around. You need to stay home.
So basically, like, you got to explain virology, like how viruses work.
Right, like even though you don't have symptoms, if you go out and you talk to somebody, especially if you don't want to wear a mask, like, you're taking your virus and just putting it all over you, all other people, And so I ran into that as well.
But did you find folks who believe that they did not have COVID? Because I know that was also a thing. Literal people dying, their dying breath is that this is not COVID.
I had a person like, it wasn't COVID. I'm like, well, sir, you was hospitalized because you couldn't breathe for like almost a week. No, it wasn't COVID. It was something else. Like, he did not believe that he had it. And I'm like, well, sir, I'm looking at your test results. Oh, them test results are wrong. I'm like, I'm looking at your labs, like right.
I wonder why. What's your sense of why? Is it denial? Is it like the stigma of COVID? Is
I
it
think
that he still needed to work, so he couldn't admit that
denial.
he had it?
He also mentioned how he didn't appreciate what the governor was doing.
I was about to say, I wonder if there is, because I'm taking a wild guess, and I'm not trying to stereotype, but I believe that folks who deny that COVID exists is a different group than folks who believe it exists, but have other conspiracy theories about it. Because I think there's a very, you can almost group it politically, or sometimes racially, around this group of people who believe that they do not have COVID, it's something else. And the problem I want to bring up with that is that, along with being considered anti-vaxxers, I also saw Black people being grouped into that. Like, that's why they don't want to get the vaccine, because they don't think COVID exists. And I don't know if that's true for a lot of Black people, but that's something that really stuck out to me about that denial. But is it because you said it's connected to when you said what our governor was doing? And if you're not in Michigan, we're talking about the governor of Michigan, who they tried to assassinate because she wanted people to wear masks.
They tried to kidnap her. Yeah. So when stuff like this is interesting, like from a public health perspective, Ebony, of what do you do when public health itself gets politicized in these kind of ways?
So like, never in a million years did I think a pandemic would have been politicized. Like, wearing a mask being politicized, like, I would have never imagined that. And so sometimes we have an uphill battle. I've had some COVID cases where they were essential workers and they end up catching it at work because people want to walk around and not wear a mask. And then like the companies don't want to enforce it out of primarily, I guess, safety for the essential workers. So like, I had a woman at Walmart who used to work at like a Walmart, and she said she had to quit because people would come in there with no mask and they couldn't say anything in fear of retaliation, because she was like, it's been so, people have been attacked.
Wow.
You know, just for telling someone to wear a mask. And so
I don't want to say it's, I think some companies are doing it because I'm not going to say where John works, but if you know John, you know where he works. Worked. Shouldn't have said that. Anyway, the point is that where he works, it was just a company policy that if people said, I have, they do that whole, the Second Amendment of Section 7245 says that I have the right to, as a religious and medical, that whole spiel. They just let him in. And that's why he's currently not working, because he's high risk. And when you have a store that's small and you've got 5-10 people in there with no mask on, because the one thing I don't think people get is that the mask is not to protect me from you, it's to protect you from me. No, that's it right?
No, the reverse.
Yes, it's to protect me from you. It's to protect you is the point. Thank you. So the idea that I don't have to wear a mask because everybody else is wearing one, that's not how it works.
Yeah, no.
And yet there are certain medical conditions like skipped heartbeats and stuff like that, but they, you can wear a different kind of mask, and limit how often you're in.
Yeah, you can wear a face shield.
You can wear a face shield.
Like, I don't know why, as a person with that ailment, that I would want to go into a store full of people where I could
live your life. But I get it. It. But the people are what am I trying to say? People are, I think, taking advantage of that. In the case that you just brought up, for the listening audience, John is Jazz's partner.
Yes, he's a guy I know. He lives here sometimes. But people have been attacked, and again, I think to some extent you can see that there's different groups, because what I observed, I live in the hood. I'm not gonna say people over here wear their masks all the time, but what I did notice is the people who don't just put it on so they can go in the store and get what they're trying to get and take it off when they come outside or do whatever they're trying to do, because it's not worth the hassle. I think there's a bit of privilege in the having the energy to
Mm-hmm.
fight wearing a mask in a store. You wouldn't fight to not come in the store with no shoes on.
Right. Like stores have like no socks, no, not so, no shirt, no shoes, no service. I was like, can we throw a mask in there?
Mm-hmm.
But they, I mean, I don't know. Some stores, like, they do not play at all. It's like, we will argue with you. And some stores was like, you know what? It's not worth it, especially since people have been killed for this. And so it's just such a slippery slope. And I think what I've come to conclusion that people just don't like to be told what to do.
Americans
Americans do not like to be told.
Americans don't like to be
slip it right into my First Amendment rights kind of stuff.
Yeah, really, Americans don't like to be told what to do when it benefits other people. Because it takes me back.
Or when stuff is unnecessarily, politicized for no reason.
Yeah, but it's politicized to be about something that it ultimately at the root of it, it's asking you to care about others. But I want to say, though, that I still think that is different from the conversation about the vaccine, because me putting on a mask is a mild inconvenience. But I do think there's some justified concern with the vaccine when we talk about the history. Look, let's just start with our current healthcare system. Let's not even get into the history. Our current healthcare system, our lack of everything that should be there.
There's distrust and there's anger too.
Yeah,
there's a lot of anger toward healthcare, and for obvious reasons. Americans have been robbed and done so dirty that we're just I think highly suspicious in general and disgruntled about it.
Yeah. And then also, I don't know if you all heard about the case about the pharmacists who purposely left out the vial.
I couldn't understand the motivation for that. Was it like they were angry at their place of employment, or what was the motive on that?
I don't know, but some people, I think they said 57 people end up getting that vaccine. They say it's not going to harm them. It's just not effective.
It's not effective. So
I read several articles looking for the reasoning too, and it wasn't provided, which I think a lot of us know that when they don't say, we know what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is an interesting conversation too, because like a lot of the fear is citing these examples of a relatively small number of people who have had allergic responses out of the millions of vaccines that have been administered. And so what to do when and speaking of the talk that we're having about real solutions, what do you do when that sort of thing comes up? About people pointing to these examples of why they shouldn't get the vaccine.
And I think you also, I don't know if this happens in other countries, but we also have, just if you watch TV in the middle of the afternoon, you see plenty of lawsuits about medical practices. Like if you had X, Y, and Z procedure done, you may be entitled to funds. You start to get this feeling like we keep doing things medically that we shouldn't, and we try to fix them in lawsuits, which I want to throw in there. From my understanding, what I'm reading, if you do have an adverse reaction to this vaccine, that you cannot sue.
Yep. I know there's something called vaccination court. I think that's what it's called. Whereas if you do have like harm from a vaccine, there is a payout. But from what I hear, these COVID vaccines won't be part of that. And I don't know if it's because of the rush to get through everything, because it didn't go through the normal what's it called, process of getting vaccines approved.
It didn't. It was expedited. How it didn't go through the clinical trials? The same way.
For emergency use, they can skip some steps.
Okay.
And so I don't know if that's why, but I know it's not. You can't sue for it. I do remember reading about that.
We as a country have a long history of protecting corporations over people. And I think that is
And
something
treating
else that
corporations as people, actually.
exactly. And so when we see that there's an effort to protect the corporation from the backlash of what could happen, you start to think there must be a good possibility that that can happen. If you're telling me that I can't hold a corporation or a company accountable for a misstep, understanding emergencies and all that, then you're also telling me that there's a good chance that that misstep might happen and that I will not receive the protections that this company receives.
We have had,
And
yeah, that's a good point. I think we've
and we
had
don't have
only,
universal health care. So now I'm going to be saddled with whatever money I'd have to pay for health care for any adverse reactions. And I think that does make a difference. That's why I think the fact that we don't have universal health care really is impacting this conversation, because maybe I feel at least a little bit better knowing that any adverse reaction, I can get in an ambulance and go to the hospital and be taken care of and not receive a bill for $40,000 down the line.
not in America. But Ebony, so what do we do then? But I haven't heard any. I've heard adverse responses. They're relatively small in number from what I've read, statistically anyway. And they've been watching the people and, sort of, for 10 or 15 minutes after, and then they can treat them right there if they have any kind of allergic response.
Yeah.
And then through the screening should tell if you have any type of history like that too, or any, conditions that might make you have that kind of response. So I want to always say in everything we're talking about that shouldn't, preclude people from taking the vaccine. Vaccine, because I do believe it's our biggest hope. And I want to talk historically too about, I keep asking Ebony questions and going on rips, talking to historically too about the role of vaccines in let's say the eradication of stuff like polio, the public health efforts that needed to be taken to the same kinds of things, educate the public, deal with conspiracy theories, have a wide, trust building basically campaign around it. And so it took some time, for people to get more, trustful of that. But yet and still we've been able to eradicate polio. So we gotta, I think some historical insight, or perspective is needed here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think, one with compliance of the vaccine, it's in 2 doses and they have to be 3 weeks apart. And like you said, for adverse reactions, people have to wait. Some people, they watch for like 30 minutes. And so what I'm wondering now is, once we start vaccinating essential workers, will they come back for that second dose? Do they have
I heard that they're now talking about, instead of, because essentially, from my understanding, originally they were holding off on giving out more vaccines so they would have that second dose ready for the folks who got the first dose. But now they're thinking, because apparently in the UK they decided just everybody get this first dose and I will figure it out. But that's where they're moving towards. So I don't even know what's going to happen with the second dose.
It's a logistical challenge, the adherence piece that Ebony's talking about.
I had a case, the nurse, he had got the first dose and then ended up having COVID like 4 days later. So
can you talk about that? Like how it's like some education around getting vaccinated and then getting COVID? Like,
yeah. And so like when you get your first dose, you still have to practice wearing a mask, social distancing, and you still have to practice everything in between the first dose and the second dose. And so for my case, he had the first dose and then he ended up having symptoms, he ended up testing positive for COVID. And so it could have been either he was exposed, probably he was exposed before he got the vaccination. And so, because it could take up to 2 weeks to show symptoms. And so what he would have to do, he'd have to go through his isolation period of 10 days. And then afterwards, he can get the second dose.
Okay.
So it's still effective.
It's still effective.
Yeah, it's still effective. They just have to wait. Now, if people who, no, they're actually saying people who had antivirals, whatever. I know Trump had some type of I don't know, it was like antiviral medicine or whatnot. People that end up getting those type of treatments, they have to wait 3 months. So
Why?
something, you know, is an antibody treatment. If people receive
Mm.
antibody treatments for COVID, they can't get the vaccine right away. But everybody else, as of right now, they're saying that they can. But you know, some people are like, well, the research isn't there, you know, like you can't do research on pregnant women, I believe, or something like that. And so
That
a
was
lot
one
of
of the
pregnant,
things that came up. It's pregnant and women in childbearing ages and the long-term effects there.
yeah.
Do we have any data on that yet?
No.
Well, obviously not, because we don't have long-term data.
Right. And
Okay.
so I think for pregnant women that are willing to take the vaccine, I think they're having them sign up for like a pregnancy registry so that they can voluntarily let, you know, these companies know if they're having any adverse effects or whether everything is good. And so the companies can follow them through their pregnancy and through probably, if they choose to breastfeed, kind of follow them through that journey. So it's totally voluntary, but as of right now, you know, it's not really a lot of data on pregnant women and women who are nursing, how that can affect. But we know with COVID, if you're pregnant and you end up getting COVID, especially if you're in your second trimester, you're at a higher chance of miscarrying too. So,
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah. So it's like, it's just hard. But I mean, when it comes to the vaccine, with anything you take, there's a risk. Now, I remember I was reading the list of side effects and I was like, this is not for COVID vaccine, is it? And it was for Viagra. It was like heart failure and X, Y, and Z,
Right.
and men are still willing to
Look, people
Right.
risk
That's
it all.
a very good point. That's a very good point, Ebony. Right.
I have two questions that are completely unrelated, so I'm trying to figure out which one I want to ask. They're related, but they're unrelated. One of the questions I have is there are multiple different vaccines out.
Yeah.
I think there's 3, right, that have been approved.
How does that work?
2 so far.
2.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? I don't understand.
Different companies went through it. Ebony, is your understanding that there's the Pfizer one is 2 doses? Is the other one just 1, or
no? They're both 2.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and they are stressing
so what's
that
the
you cannot
difference,
mix them.
though? Like, if I have to make a decision, and I don't even know if I get to make a decision about which one I get, what's the difference? I get 2 companies. Is it just like generic and on brand? Like, I don't understand.
No. They're both. Ooh. I keep hearing they're both mRNA vaccines.
Right. So it doesn't contain any of the actual virus, like the.
No, there's no live virus.
That's important. That's important. But you cannot get COVID from the vaccine.
Yeah, you cannot get COVID from the vaccine, because I've been hearing that, they're gonna give you COVID. No, that's not how this works. I know it has something. I know they has the spiked protein, because if you ever seen the little coronavirus, how it has like the little things sticking out.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I don't know much about the vaccine. I just know it's not live. I really don't know the difference between the two. I think they're pretty similar.
Yeah, they different labs, went through the same clinical trial process and came out with pretty similar, They
both have the spike protein, I think, in the.
In science, in the science world, you're just building on, previous discoveries anyway. So they probably were operating from the same basis on how.
Is there any other example of a illness that there is multiple different vaccines for?
The flu would be one.
Yeah.
So when you get the flu shot, there's not like the flu shot. It's like this company's flu shot or this company's flu shot.
Yeah, it's different manufacturers. I think for a lot of the vaccines, I believe.
And the different manufacturers are not using the exact same formula.
You know, I can't answer that. I'm not exactly sure.
I'm not either, but they're responding to the strand, whatever the biggest strand is, which changes every year, which flu strand is the biggest. And so they vaccinate for that. And they have to make decisions about, how much of it to make and what they're anticipating and stuff like that. That's about my extent of that knowledge, though.
But
Yeah.
I think those are pieces of information that would help the public, because it
Hold on
just
one second,
seems.
y'all. Wally is looking like he's about to mark my
Oh,
furniture.
let me. Okay, Wally, please don't, Wally World. That's my boy.
Yeah, I'm thinking with the research, I think they're similar. I really believe they're similar.
But I feel like this is information that would help that conversation around convincing people to get it. Because for me, I'm partially like, so what's the difference? Like, you keep telling me these new vaccines are coming out from this company and that company, but I don't know how to make a decision because I don't know the difference between these two, if there is one.
I don't think there's too much of a difference. They're both do the mRNA vaccines. They both have this pretty close efficacy rates. They both are in 2 doses. Now the Moderna one, that one does not have to be in like freezing cold, like super freezing cold.
It has to be different.
Yeah, I don't know if it's, yeah, they have to be different. I just don't know how, because Pfizer you have to keep that on dry ice.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
because that's the one that got left out.
No, it was the Moderna. Someone took it out the freezer and just like, and just left it out. It was the Moderna. So the Moderna can go in like a regular freezer.
Okay.
But the Pfizer one you have to find like something that's super duper 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 cold, in order to keep that one. And so I remember the city of Detroit, when they were trying to figure out the Pfizer, when they were trying to figure out where they could keep it at, because there was nothing super duper cold. But once Moderna came out and theirs didn't have to be as cold, it was like, okay, we can just go with Moderna.
I think this is part of that when we're talking about solutions, is helping people to understand that, because I think that makes people leery too. Anytime there's a gray area around something that's health related, and we're talking specifically about communities of color, not just Black folks, because I'm even thinking of, we talk about mistrust of the medical system. In 2020 is when we found out that they were sterilizing undocumented women without their knowledge, right?
Through a whistleblower account.
Right. In 2020 is when they started talking about, when they were going to test out the vaccine going to Africa. Like we got plenty of 2020 examples of why people are leery. And so you have to provide that information. And I think that one of the mistakes that's being made is that when you have, again, I always say diversity inclusion, when you have a group of people who feel the same way, they forget people feel differently. So if I have a group of white, male, or maybe not male, but white doctors who have trust in the system, maybe they trust the government, maybe they trust all the process, and you just have to tell them this is the vaccine and they'll take it. They don't think about the fact that other people don't feel that way. And even as a doctor, if you do it, I'm not a doctor. I still want to know more information. I still want to know, because in my mind, I might want to make another decision, or I have other health issues that I want to consider and look into. And on the flip side of the conversation where they wanted to go do these experiments in Africa, which alarmed the hell out of everybody, well, Black folks. On the other hand, the new question is, were there Black people involved in these clinical trials?
That's a good question.
That's a really good question.
I know of one prominent Black man who specifically for, there tends to be underrepresentation of both women and people of color in general, Black people specifically, in clinical trials. So I know of one prominent Black figure in health, and I can't remember his name or his role specifically, but I know he wanted to be involved, and he's been on CNN and stuff like that, talking about his experience and encouraging people to get the virus. To get the virus. Excuse me. Please don't get the virus, to get the vaccine. But he said he deliberately wanted to do that. And my aunt had, that was one of her concerns, is that, who was involved in these clinical trials, and was there diversity in terms of, in terms of, all the ways that matter, race and gender and so forth. Or all the ways that people think it matters in terms of race and gender, and in pre-existing conditions of various sorts and stuff like that. Valid questions. I worry a little bit about whether or not that gets us back into racial medicine, that somehow our bodies are different on a biological basis in terms of race, which we know is not the case.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of so many examples of how things have been created based on one body and one model, and then they fail other people. So seatbelts with women
is one of the biggest ones.
And I don't know if you've seen the two things they've been talking about more recently. One, because I'm looking at my little notes, kidney disease. As they're talking now, they're saying that Black people are on the waiting list for kidney disease longer because the chemical or whatever it is that they use to determine how far along or the impact is different in Black people. I don't know all the details. I'll probably link an article. And then the finger oxygen monitors. You know what I'm talking about? The little thing they clip on your finger?
Pulse oximeter.
Thank you. That's why I have y'all here. And they're saying that it doesn't read through the color as well. So it's giving, it's giving inaccurate readings. And that, of course, makes me think of Kodak film. I always use this reference of, if you look at old black and white films, people are like, why are all the Black people just look like eyeballs and teeth? It's because they sent out, when they created a film, they sent out these testing photos. They were all of white women. So that's what they used to test the lighting. So it's great. We can light white people. Great. Does not light Black people. And so
self-driving cars too, and for a more recent example,
the facial recognition. There's so many examples. So I definitely agree with you, Rachel, that we don't want to make it seem like we have to have something specific because our bodies are different. But there are enough differences, and it impacts us negatively when those differences are not considered.
Well, okay, so I'm a CPR instructor, right? Mm-hmm. And so my mannequins are all men, like the male chest. Mm-hmm. And so what I run into, what I always stress is, with a woman, if you have to do CPR, you got to take off her bra.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
But also, signs of a heart attack for women are different than a man. And so for women, if they're having a heart attack, they might not have the normal chest pain. They're more likely having stomach pain.
Right.
And they didn't discover that for a long time because studies was only done on men.
On men. That's one of the big
autism.
examples.
They're now realizing that autism looks different. I think there's just so many examples, not just about race, not just about Black people, of the issues we have in our medical system, which all boils down to a distrust that things were done in a way that will keep everybody safe. And instead, it was done in a way that will keep straight white men safe. You know what I mean? So, go get it.
So you're talking about, this is interesting for you to discuss, Jazz, with the diversity and inclusion background. Of, like, what do you think of the diversity in clinical trials, and how to encourage that, and whether or not it matters?
Girl, to me, it's the same thing as trying to get folks to participate in other trials, the legal trials. What's it called? In the jury.
Oh yeah.
I think that the large scale issue, clinical trials, getting the vaccine, all of that, is that the chickens have come home to roost for the United States of America. You cannot function in a space of ongoing, consistent racism and sexism and expect everybody just to come together because that's what's needed.
Right.
There is such deep mistrust. Like, I'm not even being funny. I've started keeping a running list of everything. People say everything's not about race. I have a running list of things that are about race. It's the most random things. It's the song. It's the song on the ice cream truck, right? It is. I'm not even gonna go into that list. Maybe I will. But but
I like how she had a real list.
I do. Here it is.
I mean, the whole watermelon, ha 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 ha. Yeah.
Everything.
Black cats being considered bad luck. Tegan lost body hair and shaving. it boils down to race and racial superiority, fat phobia, homeowners association. There's everything is about. So
Yes.
that is the
Yes.
base of the United
Yep,
States
that is
of
the-
America.
Yeah.
And further, that is the definition of structural isms and inequality.
Yes. And because we are not just as a country, but I think with the current administration, we have been set back so far to have this conversation. There's no way that you can suddenly ask people to just set all that shit aside and put their life on the line, which is what I think the feeling is, for the betterment of a country that doesn't give a shit about you. So in reality, what's needed is something we don't have time for, which is trust building. We don't have the time, we don't have the energy, we don't have the money to try to undo.
We do. I would push back. Do you really think we don't? If we don't have, I would say we don't have the willpower.
How much time do you need?
Because if we want to build trust in, some capitalist product that they're put Tesla, because it entered the S&P 500, then we're going to do that through aggressive advertising and marketing and social media and representatives,
But Tesla
we have
is
the money. We don't have
is a corporation, so it's not politicized. What's his name? The dude with all the money who's problematic. He can make that decision.
Which one?
To say
Elon Musk?
whoever's over Tesla. Yeah.
Okay.
He can say we're going to put $3 million towards this, but we can't even agree on a stimulus check. We can't even agree. So who's going to approve the funds that are needed? And understanding that not just the funds, but the topic itself is political, because you're going to have to convince people that there is an issue in the country that needs to be addressed. And the issue is about trust. Like that.
You're right.
That
Can I read a quote? Can I read a quote?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Okay, wait a minute. Because I saw this on Facebook and I was like, yes. And I don't know who this person is, but she said, I need politicians to stop saying the Black community doesn't trust our vaccine and start saying we have a history of medically abusing Black people. Thus, we violated their trust.
And the Black community is not monolithic either. I'm in the Black community. I'm going to get the vaccine. How about y'all? Uh-oh.
I don't get to the details.
Hold up. Y'all wait. We just got to the real issue. Are you going to get
answer is not no. My answer is not now. That's honestly, I have to be honest. And the problem I see coming up is that on the other part of that is that they're saying that employers can require it. So it's going to be a larger issue, especially now that it's not just Black folks. So now it's gonna be a larger issue, but I'm in the camp of not right now. I want to let the folks who have trust in the system
family,
get it.
Yeah. My partner, my mom, my family, they're all in that camp with you. So I'm gonna go first. I'll report back to everybody.
I support you. I would never tell somebody not to get it. I encourage people to get it. But I am one of those people who's like, I'll get it once we see what the outcome is. And I know that that's a problem.
So real solutions then. So for folks like you, we didn't hear from Ebone yet. I'm scared.
I'm not an essential worker, so I need to talk to my doctor. We need to create a plan because, I want to make sure it's not going to interfere with my medication. Okay. Like we don't have enough research about that. And I think I wouldn't be surprised my doctor's actually like, let's hold off on you getting it. Let's look to see, let's get some more research before. Okay. I wouldn't be surprised my doctor, that's a conversation between me and my doctor. I mean, I want to treat it like I treat my Apple updates. I usually wait like a month or two.
You gotta see. They work out the kinks.
You work out the kinks. And then, I'm still on iOS 13, but I'll probably.
And this is what I keep hearing, over and over again.
And that's why I said I don't think having prominent Black people get it is going to make people immediately get it. We're just gonna be watching to see what happened to them. Like, all right, let's see how it goes.
But what I don't appreciate, my brother. I don't know, the Attorney General, the Surgeon General. I don't know his name. I know him as, I think his name is Jerome.
Okay.
I don't appreciate how Jerome is calling out prominent Black people like, you need to get the vaccine. Sir, you should have been calling out that president when he was just going around. Let me tell you, when he was going around contagious, doing parades or, you know, leaving the hospital, doing what he wanted to do. Instead of calling out these Black celebrities, you should have been calling out the president.
And keep in mind that for Black folk, the other piece is that we recognize if shit goes wrong for us, we're screwed. No one's coming to save us. We're not getting special treatment. We're not even getting equal treatment. We've never had access to that.
Net. Yeah, the social safety net too. I think we have to mention that in terms of what has been needed from our government in the social safety net during this pandemic. You know, what by and large has not been received adequately. So we saw how backlogged our systems were for unemployment and things like that. So I think people are bogged down and stressed out by the inefficiencies. And that,
but that's what breaks the trust.
My sense is that has something to do with
it breaks the trust because it looks like the government and the folks in charge do not know what they're doing. Right. I don't think there's a lot of Black folks who think that things are being well taken care of. And so this is worst case scenario of all the times for a pandemic. If it happened, you know, 4 years before, we might have been okay. 4 years after, we might have been okay. But right now,
but that's the reason that we have such a disastrous outbreak, is because we have, you know,
exactly.
We don't have government efficiency, and the main representative for our democracy is who he is, you know, and undermined us at every step of the way, and denied that it was real, and had an intention for us to all have herd immunity, and wanted, you know, didn't really care. So that's where we are. And let's not forget, and, you know, took away the preparation that was already in place for the pandemic preparation. So what I have to say is, thank goodness it was not something like Ebola or something like that, or something that is even more.
But I will say, and that's one of, I think that would have changed things. I've been thinking about that. If this was a disease that caused terrible, painful death in ways that you could see, if it caused lesions, I know, but you know what I mean? Like a Ebola, like a leprosy, like people would have acted different. You wouldn't have folks arguing about masks.
I'd like to think so, but with this current administration in charge, I have no doubt that we would have had a raging Ebola virus in the United States of America.
But I mean, if you think about in the very beginning, when, like, even when it hit Michigan, and how when the governor shut down everything, everybody was okay. But then when the data started coming out that it was affecting Black folks,
that part,
all of a sudden, everybody, I want my hair cut. I'm not wearing a mask. Why are restaurants closing? But when they
became racialized.
Jazz, this is jump in on the racialization and the gendering of essential workers.
Oh yes.
Who are on the front lines.
I've always said, so it makes me think of when I used to work at some colleges, or when I was in college, and I would have white students tell me that they have never met a Black person before. Usually after they said or did something that was highly problematic, and they always
touched your hair.
Touch my hair, said the N-word, whatever. They would say that. And I went to college, and I worked at a university up in West Michigan, which, if you're not familiar with it, I'm gonna just tell you, it's a very, very special place. And I always would think to myself, great school. I would send my students there. I mean, my kids. I don't have any students. I also don't have children. But what I used to always think about is, that's not true. You've definitely met people of color before. They were just in service roles, so you did not see them. Right. You didn't see the waitress. You didn't see the person change your oil. You didn't see the janitor. You've seen them. That's who does those jobs. The job, when you talk about people taking all the jobs,
Black folks, and you didn't realize that it was your grandma.
Look, we was gonna get into the lineage. Like, you looked in your photo album, you've seen plenty of Black folk. But when when you think about those people who say folks are taking all the jobs that are being taken, especially in West Michigan, that has a large Latinx population, are jobs that white folks don't want. They're service jobs. And so nobody gives a shit about the people who do service jobs. We can praise essential workers all day, but there is not like essential places have, but it's not like suddenly you would think with this conversation about essential workers that it would go hand in hand with raising the minimum wage. You care
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah,
You
hazard pay, you know.
right. Not,
Yeah.
but that's why I'm like, that's hazard pay. Raise the
Hmm.
minimum wage. If you
Hmm.
recognize that we probably should pay people more to convince them to do this job, look, I'm gonna do my job, and I've been into the office a couple of times. I'm paid a livable, and I'm paid well. You can't convince me to risk my life for $10.50 to make
Yeah,
sandwiches for someone who gonna yell at me.
or the meat factories are a big one.
Oh yeah.
It's
Yeah,
coming to mind now.
you can't pay me 10, $11 to be shoulder to shoulder with someone who's coughing just so you can have pork chops. But
Right.
And
yeah,
I remember my friend who's he's a lawyer, employment lawyer. What he was saying with these jobs that they're not finding these jobs or really holding them accountable for
no,
unsafe work conditions
nope.
for
Right.
their
So that
work.
was part of the package, which was held up the legislation in Congress because they wanted to push back in order to make sure that the liability for corporations was in place. You know, conservatives wanted to push back on that to protect corporations, basically.
Right.
Which
So
brings us back to the whole thing with the vaccine. We always protect. There's too many at like on the minute examples of ways that we do not give a shit about our citizens to try to turn around and convince our citizens to be selfless and sacrifice themselves.
Hmm.
That's
mhm.
why our
When
military,
culturally we're pretty selfish, you know, with in
yes,
some ways
that
culturally.
that
I
I
hate
mean
to say
that's
stuff
all
like that
American.
because then we, you know, we have to acknowledge all of the folks that give so selflessly and show up in times of panic and pandemic and
I
you
read
know
something though. Let me just say, I read
mayhem.
something that was about how Americans love to be heroic. They love to show up in that time of need, but they don't want to do anything to keep that time of need from happening. So they will
And
donate to a GoFundMe, they will donate to a cause, but they won't vote for the things that keep those issues. So I'll donate to your GoFundMe for your medical expenses. I will not vote for universal health care.
and
Mm.
pause for
That's
the fact that
America.
that's how many people are having to take care of their medical needs is having to start GoFundMe campaigns
Yep.
and stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Uh, it's unfortunate though. I mean, you know, the bottom line. So what are the solutions then? But I'm curious about for you all who said you have to that you're going to wait, Jazz particularly. What would you need to hear in terms of like real solutions to say, okay, I'm okay with getting this vaccine?
I'm gonna tell you my ideal situation. My ideal situation is Biden comes into office. He does a mandatory shutdown and a mandatory mask, thing. Everyone has to wear a mask. Only
He can only
essential
do that.
business.
He's going to do that for government agencies, I think
Yeah.
only.
See,
And then he can encourage the governors to do
and
it.
that's in cleaning up after what's already been left. It's gonna be a mess. That's what I'm saying. You're not gonna be able to convince. But in my ideal world, things would be shut down, mandatory mask, and then in 6 months to a year, I would get it.
Hmm.
I think that, and over the course of that time, we spend a lot of time educating about the process of creative vaccines. What's the difference? Who's in it? Being aware, being transparent, and then doing good faith efforts. Again, I'm saying idea because none of this shit's gonna happen. Good faith efforts to fix, because we can't correct what's already happened, but to acknowledge what's happened and fix it. Universal health care, putting things in place that protect folks who get the vaccine so I don't feel like I get it and it don't work out and I'm screwed. Putting things in place to show that we're going to fix some of the other pieces, like all of that would need to happen. And then in 6 months ish to a year, then I would get it. That's still with the wait. But without all those pieces, I have to be honest. I'm gonna be leery, but it's not. And the mess up thing is what I just said is not impossible. It's what other countries have already done. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Hmm.
They've
Hmm.
already
Hmm.
started to work. We just never did. And if nothing positive comes out of this, I hope if one thing that positive comes out of it is that we finally recognize that we have to address our history. We can't ignore it. We can't do, because in the midst of this, I think they took what happened. They started saying that diversity training was racist
Yes.
and
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yes. Racial
Yeah.
sensitivity training, which is like the
yes.
primary thing that's needed right now, actually,
So
in medical contexts.
I hope that we have a moment where we recognize how important companies have and this was so funny, companies have completely understood suddenly the need for diversity and inclusion. There's so many jobs popping up because it's tied to revenue. This
Right.
our ability, we're not slaves anymore. We do not provide what we used to provide. As a slave owner, that slave I paid for is part of income. Something happens and they die, that directly impacts my ability to do what I'm trying to do with my business, right? We're not that anymore. We're a dime a dozen. So if an essential worker dies, they just hire another one. And so without that feeling that we are, for lack of a word, cared about, that we have value to this country, we're not going to risk our lives. We're not going to fight your wars. We're not taking your vaccine. Like, that's where it is. Again, I'm gonna get the vaccine. I can't. It's too much. It's too much for me to do it. Like, if they call me tomorrow and say, "Come on, get it," I'm gonna say, "Call me back in 6 months."
You say, I
I'll get
respectfully
it.
decline.
But
I would get it, and I would keep y'all posted on what happens.
yes, please do. Like, for real.
What about you, Ebony, for as far as real solutions from a public health perspective, and given the work that you do?
I mean, first, there needs to be an acknowledgement of what happened to us as a people in the past and how we've been, experimented on, how we've been treated. Well, not even the past, just currently.
And
There
that would be
needs to
so
be
big
acknowledged
because
about
so many
that.
white folks pretend that they don't believe that happened. That's
Yeah.
why it's important it's acknowledged. They don't believe that happened. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And even like going back to Dr. Susan Moore, the comments, oh, well, everybody's dying of COVID. This doesn't need to be a race issue. Kind of like diminishing her experience. And
Right.
so, like, that can't happen. You have to acknowledge what has happened, and it's currently happening to us as a people. In order
How
to
do you
make
think
you have to
we
make us feel safe.
how do we honor her legacy?
Man,
That's
I don't know.
look,
Like, it was
my
just
first
so
thought
hard.
was a fight, but I don't think we should fight. Because
I
I'm
think that's
angry.
fair.
It makes
Rage.
it makes you angry. Everything about this year has made me angry when we talk about this, because all I see, and this is what prompted this conversation, all I see are people bumbling around trying to understand why Black people respond that way. And I think all of us on the call can look and be like, well, we know why. Why do people think it's a 5G conspiracy? Because we've had so many wild ass conspiracies. The government was slipping people LSD. So you trying to tell me that the 5G thing is just completely out of the norm?
Look at what happened recently. Rachel had kind of touched on it when the memo leaked about how they were trying to make sure that everybody just get COVID and don't let the minorities know.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why I keep saying I feel like we're too late. I wish, if I could go back, that these were the conversations, the work that was done prior to 2020. And you wouldn't have people thinking that if I just breathe in lemons and salt, that I'll be fine. If I can hold my breath, I'll be fine. If I blow up the 5G tower, I'll be fine. But and I want to say that's also not just Black folk. That's not just Black folk. It's not race specific, because they're starting. I did read, could be wrong, but they were thinking that the guy who blew up in Nashville, he blew up the camper.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
They were thinking that was related to a 5G conspiracy.
I saw that too. Yeah.
People taking that cleaning fluid because that's what the president. So how do you fix? Really, the question is, how do you educate? How do you acknowledge? And how do you fix misinformation?
Well, my brother said something. There's always going to be a handful of the population. Any big numbers of people,
Yeah, of course,
you're always going to have
people who think it's aliens. I always think everything is aliens. Still think it's aliens. Don't mean I wouldn't get the vaccine. That's fine. I still think it's aliens.
I mean,
y'all heard that Margaret Cho joke that if aliens rode past Earth, they would keep going.
For sure. Look, I've got theories about the Earth actually being a prison for aliens. They send their prisoners here, but I'm not gonna get into that.
All righty.
See, now I just discredited everything I said.
And for the next podcast.
What about you, Rachel? What? I'm sorry. I mean, we're gonna say something.
No, I mean, it's really hard. I mean, because you have a whole bunch of Facebook doctors now.
Oh, that part too.
Yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
because anybody can post anything. When you have the president saying fake news to credible sources,
Mm.
it's gonna be hard. I think it's just gonna take time.
Yeah,
That's the only thing I could think of. It's just gonna take time.
I would echo that. You're about to ask me, Jazz. Same
Mhm.
thing. You know, I'm an educator for a living, so for better or worse, I believe in the power. And I think what I've learned is that it's a one-to-one type of thing. It's a big, you know, public health. You got to get to the masses, but in order to do that, you got to reach individual people. So that's how I teach, you know, and I try to teach my students holistically. So with that, you know, I think we need the right information, like Jazz started us off with, about why people are apprehensive. So we need the right information so that we can then have targeted campaigns of public health education. And then in our day-to-day lives, you know, being willing to have these conversations with our family members, friends, you know, partners, et cetera, colleagues. That's it's human to human. That's all I, just like the virus spreads, you know.
It
I think
is.
public education for, you know,
Yeah.
around vaccinations is
But
gonna have to be
what
the
you
same.
said is it. It's seeing us as people, as humans, and not seeing us as this, you know, group of this mysterious group of people. I think that's the root of it, of is not seeing us for what we can do, but seeing us as people. And I think right now a lot of us feel like we're seen as like saviors, saviors from the, you know, the political landscape, saviors from the
Black savior.
virus,
Yeah.
saviors from the, you know, the, what is it, the pandemic fatigue, where we want to
Mhm.
go out and go to restaurants and we want to walk around the store because we're saviors. And I think that that is a big part of it, is seeing us as people. And I think the last thing I'll add is that I'm not saying me, but they really need to bring in. I looked to see if there was a position in the White House that directly addressed diversity and inclusion.
Hmm.
And I don't, from my understanding, there isn't, but I think
So I
that's needed.
created one, and now I
So
run the
I
White
created a
House's
job
diversity
description
and
and I'm
inclusion
applying.
program.
But no, I think it's needed. I think it's needed now more than ever, to bring in an expert.
Yeah,
Not
that's a good
just
point.
not just some Black people,
Mm-hmm.
not just a diverse group of people. That is also needed, but an expert who can speak to this is the pieces that we're talking about, the history, the concerns, just
Yeah.
that understanding of what's happening and how to address it, because it feels like they're just throwing darts in the dark
Mm-hmm.
of trying to apply the logic of their personal experience to what's happening in communities that are completely different from there. So I think that will make a difference for the country, period, just overall. Do I
Yeah.
think any of
Yeah.
that's gonna happen? Hell no.
Maybe I hope so. I hope at least, you know, on a small scale, that there be enough individuals that, you know, and organizations that do. I have to say, you know, I've been impressed with my in a university context. It's been different for each university. My university's public health response and plan was actually quite commendable. So I just wanted to say that. So I hope so. Maybe I'm, you know, I'm the eternal optimist though. But the last thing I wanted to say was also something that each of you touched on, was the history lessons part of it. From my perspective, is I'd like to remind us of the success of, you know, vaccine efforts to eradicate conditions in the
Mm-hmm.
past,
Mhm.
you know, such as polio and things like that. So, you know, I remain hopeful. But like Ebony said too, is time is the key.
Well, we're at the end. I want to give y'all some time. If there's anything else you would like to say, anything else you want to acknowledge, before we wrap up. Ebony, I'll let you go. Rachel was just talking. Ebony, you got
Oh,
anything?
um, man. Other than just wear a mask.
Please, please, Lord Jesus, and put it over your nose.
Oh yes,
Oh
yes.
my, we didn't even get to that, y'all. That's the next episode.
Look,
Like I did a whole
put your
TikTok
mask on
about
your
that.
nose.
Oh my goodness.
Wash your
Yeah.
hands. Put your mask over your nose.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think as far as the vaccine, because they're not trying to give it just to Black people, they're trying to give it to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that makes me more comfortable with it. I just, like I said, I have to talk to my doctor about it, but if people are willing, I encourage people to get the vaccine. Because a lot of Black people died from this.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Black people, like even the project I was working on with United Memories, just trying to honor all the Black people that died from COVID. A lot of people died. And so if someone say, I'm not getting the vaccine and blah, 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 because they trying to kill me, I'm like, that's not it. They're not trying to kill you, because they're offering it to everybody. And actually, there's some issues where some people who are not frontline workers are getting the vaccine, where residents and nurses aren't able to. So yeah, so I'm like, that's not it. The conspiracy thing, and I get it though, because of things that has happened in the past to us. And so I am, patient when talking to people about just vaccines, period.
Patience, that's the key word right there. Yeah.
But also the whole mandate thing, that makes me nervous, because people don't, people like to feel that they have a choice about their body.
We were mandated to take some vaccines when we went to college, weren't we? Do y'all remember that? What did we have to take?
I know meningitis.
Yeah.
Meningitis.
I think you had to turn in some medical records.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had tetanus or something. It was something.
I don't think I got a meningitis shot.
I know. I know my doctor encouraged it because I was living in a dorm setting.
Right. So we've had, but that's an interesting point. As we wrap up, so we didn't even get to all the points. But because when Ebony was talking about the death rates among Black folks and also Indigenous folks and Latinx folks, we have got to acknowledge the grief, on a national level, and memorialize this level of grief and trauma and mourning.
I want to throw in there real quick to keep in mind that COVID impacted, a lot of people died, not necessarily from COVID, but because of COVID. Yes. So, hospitals being full, fear of going into the hospital. I'm not able to get some of those procedures you would usually get to keep you alive.
Good point.
Most of the people that I lost this year was not from COVID. I have so many friends and family members who were sick from other things that probably wouldn't have happened if we weren't in a pandemic. And I think that's the piece much bigger than just thinking about COVID. There's the grief, the mental health, and then there's the other illnesses. But like you said, we're not a country that deals well with mental health. We think that,
or death, for that matter.
Yeah. And it would be nice if, I'll add that to my list of ideal situations of world. Grief counseling in low income neighborhoods. Therapy, free therapy in low income neighborhoods. It's something I would have liked before this, but that's a good start, because we don't right now. And I know this from personal experience with family and friends and stuff, but if you don't have good insurance, you're in a low income neighborhood, you cannot get therapy unless you have actively tried to hurt yourself or you have an addiction. You can't get it for free. Everything is focused on addiction, and you've already attempted. So that would be a nice start. That's some low-hanging fruit to me.
Yeah, especially since this pandemic has changed the way we grieve. We can't have our big funerals anymore. We can't surround ourselves with family anymore. Not right now, because I had a case where a woman got COVID from a funeral.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
And so, this has changed the way we've grieved, and the mental health, like you said, Jack, it needs to be there. It absolutely needs to be there, between not being able to grieve, between the isolation.
Yeah.
Not being able to, heck, my mother-in-law is in quarantine right now, so she can't even come and hug her grandkids. She has to stay in the house.
Wow.
And I think that's a conversation for Black people, because half of that is our own apprehension around dealing with mental health. It's not just that we don't have access. We have to get over our own stereotypes about it, which makes me think of how during slavery, they used to make up mental illnesses that were all about the fact that we didn't want to be slaves. Like,
Drapetomania.
Yeah, it's just
Was
like, there's
drapetomania was this created mental illness about slaves that ran away from slavery, that they had a mental illness called drapetomania. So apparently Harriet Tubman would have qualified.
so we don't believe it, but I think it's hitting us, and we have to call it what it is. And I there's so much to be done. Rachel, did you have anything else before I wrap up?
Yes, this is it right here. It's these kind of conversations, and it's pulling people together, in our network, which I think this for me has been just not an enjoyable conversation because the topic is so heavy, but it's good to share this space, and to be able to have these conversations based on our experiences, our backgrounds, our professional roles, in our own lived experiences. So I think we need to do more of this. So I'm glad that you brought us together, Jazz.
Well, thank you. Thank y'all for coming on interviews you didn't ask for. No one asked for this. All right, y'all. Thank you for coming to interviews you didn't ask for, and listening in. I like what you said, Rachel. So if y'all have similar conversations, feel free to tag us, me, rather.
Mhm.
I don't have an actual website for this, but I think maybe this is the solution, to just keep sharing factual knowledge,
Mhm.
so that we are all informed. We're gonna have to do it ourselves. What we know across the board is we don't expect much from our government, unfortunately. So we got to do it ourselves. And I know I'm tired of this shit, so I'm trying to get out of this. And if I can help people even get on board with like getting it in 6 months, I'm good with it.
Okay.
So
Happy
all
New
right.
Year. Here we
Happy New
are,
Year. Y'all don't have to
2021.
hang up yet. I'm just gonna wrap it. But thank you for joining us. I don't have an ending. I never had, and I don't know if I'm ever gonna do another interview after this. But thank you, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed the show.